Hello, and welcome to the Deep Edge Podcast. I'm your host, Ray Mota from ACG Research, and today we're joined by someone who's been shaping internet infrastructure for more than 2 decades, Will Eatherton, engineering leader at Cisco. Will has worked across silicon, systems, routing, and AI networking, helping drive the technologies that power modern data centers. In this episode, we will dive deep into Cisco's AI strategy, their One Cisco vision, the NVIDIA partnerships, Silicon One, SONiC, HyperFabric, and how enterprises can simplify and scale their AI deployment. If you want a clear view on where AI data centers are heading, this is the right place. So let's get this started. Hey, Will, welcome to the Deep Edge Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for inviting me, Ray.
I tell you, that is the coolest background. What is that you have back there?
Well, it is a Ubuntu PC. I like to do a little hobby AI programming. It does have an NVIDIA RTX 5090, but if I'm chatting with AMD, then I don't mention that part usually.
Fair enough. Smart man. Smart man. Now, where does this podcast find you? Where you located?
I'm in San Jose.
Been here okay. So we're in a good time zone. I wasn't sure. Now, one thing for our audience that's not as familiar with you and your background, do you mind talking about your history and your role at Cisco?
Sure. Give a quick view. So I started in silicon design, 1998 kind of time frame, doing high-end routing silicon, terabit switching chips at the time, which there was, probably 4 or 5 companies in the world that cared about that. But did that, a startup, got acquired into Cisco, worked on earlier multi-chassis, routers for the internet that went in a carrier router system. Did that a number of years. Juniper, another startup, and then I've been back at Cisco. Was acquired a second time for the past 7 years. And so in simple terms, I've been in infrastructure my entire career and straddling that sort of silicon software systems, how to make them all play together and try to make them work at large scale.
Yeah, we must have been ships in the night because I start going back to installing the AGS, the IGS for Cisco early on, and then on Juniper with the M40s and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So interesting. Now, maybe for audience, we'll get started from maybe from a vision perspective and strategy. Now, Cisco has framed his AI strategy around kind of 3 pillars, and let me know if I miss anything, right? So AI-ready data centers, right?
Yep.
Future-proof in their workplace, and then the whole digital resiliency. How do these 3 pillars translate to kind of like measurable outcome and beyond?
Sure. So to quickly hit each of those, first, AI-ready data center is really the core infrastructure. So that is selling compute, networking, full solutions, our partnership with NVIDIA, and really working with hyperscalers, neoclouds, and enterprises, as well as service providers are also a key part of that. So all of that is in that AI-ready data center category. Future-proof workplaces gets to our whole campus. And as far as the outcomes there, we see a range of things, especially as we talk AI. A lot of it is, collab, bringing in AI and how that can improve hybrid work experiences. Smart workplaces has been a big push from Cisco, and we're seeing more opportunities to bring AI. And then just overall collaboration, efficient networking. We believe we're seeing more things like with AI aspects, high bandwidth applications, whether there's medical campuses, whether it's development R&D, where there is a lot more data that is needing to be transitioned between humans and the machines. And so that would be the kinds of outcomes for future-proof workplaces. And then the last one, the digital resilience. So that from a product standpoint, that's across our Splunk and ThousandEyes. As far as outcomes, this is something where things like, basically, how do you get the continuous operation? And, things like Splunk have been out there for a while, but now in the AI area, we have a view of, AI for observability and observability for AI. And so both powered by AI, so getting more insights out of the data that you already have from a security posture and standpoint. But on the flip side, we have a lot of customers that as they start to get into adding in these clusters, how do you monitor those How do you pull insights out of those? And so there has been new offerings from Cisco in that area. And so those are the three big pillars from Cisco.
No, this is a good way to break it up in that point of view. Now, I've heard different things mentioned regarding one Cisco vision. What does one Cisco vision really mean in this era of AI and multi-cloud that's kind of like redefining infrastructure?
Sure. So, everyone has been, multinational company like Cisco, like things like this come up periodically. I think for us, we have organized as one large engineering team, and I'm a engineering leader for the networking area, working with G2, who's our overall ELT. I would say there's been a range of concrete things. I think after many years, we've taken on things like Cisco Cloud Control, which is a single portal front end that it provides in the back end API gateway to all of our devices, controllers, software. And then through that Cisco Cloud Control, we're providing new ways of working with your infrastructure. So there's a new project we call AI Canvas, which is a way that you can interact across that. We're also doing new projects that span across domains in a one Cisco fashion, like our Cisco Smart Switches, which is where we're using DPU technology. And we're now, through the isovalent acquisition that we've made, we're having the ability to do common policy, whether that's an eBPF and an application layer for our customers, which I've seen, for instance, a lot of hyperscalers have been very excited about Cilium and that technology, VM level, or putting the policy in a smart switch in this DPU add-on, essentially being able to provide, like an east-west firewall. And so I think it's one Cisco is manageability aspects, it's merging technology aspects, and it's trying to move quicker in adding in capabilities across the portfolio rather than the traditional Cisco where we operated. And one other area I need to admit is when we talk about silicon, optics, and software, that's also a key area, especially in AI infra, where they're moving very fast and getting the software, the silicon, and the optics. And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the
Yes,
front
yes.
areas, but that is moving rapidly, and we have to operate as one company.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an area I want to touch base on. But what I want to do, and this might be a tough question, but I see this with companies the size of Cisco is balancing keeping existing customers happy, right? It's how does Cisco balance innovation with the speed of AI infrastructure and kind of maintain traditional strength and reliability and the trust with his existing customers? You got to keep them happy with this innovation. How do you balance that out?
Sure. I would say one way is we try to think about the different categories of customers a little differently and how we organize, how we approach. So when we engage with a hyperscaler and we're doing SONiC and new silicon and how that would get delivered and adopted, that is a very different engagement than how we would work with GM, who I was just chatting with yesterday, or Ford, or a lot of these other companies. And so I think a couple key things for the broader enterprise, both for their current infrastructure as well as they start to get into AI. They are obviously looking more for partners. They are looking for folks that can put together the solution aspect, but also how does that mesh with their current infrastructure? That is something we spend time on. That's not, and we love NVIDIA. I personally spend a lot of time with NVIDIA. That's not something they spend time on. And so those kinds of topics, how does it mesh? What does that mean from a security standpoint, from a networking interconnect standpoint, for multi-data center? And so a lot of that brownfield plus greenfield is something that we'll put a lot of attention in. And then software and manageability. I would say as you go from hyperscalers, they do all their own management. Neo clouds are looking for manageability, but enterprises, if you don't have an easy to manage solution that they can stitch into, then they aren't going to be able to adopt the technology. And so I would say I think we're straddling that, but you need to have a different mindset.
Yeah, no, I think that mindset, I always talk about this culture of innovation and that mindset to make this happen. Now, you mentioned, enterprise data centers and all that. One of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing like many enterprises are kind of struggling with operationalizing AI infrastructure, right? So how does Cisco kind of approach making these deployments in AI kind of simpler and faster and ease the whole cycle of implementation of this stuff?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I think if we take the way these AI deployments have been happening, and let's put aside hyperscale, but even for
Sure.
neo clouds, NVIDIA not only do they have the reference architecture, they have groups like NVIS, which is a essentially, I would call them sort of a special forces services org that focuses on day zero, a little bit of day one, but how do you get that up and ensure that the cluster is working? But they do that extremely prescriptive, and it's really meant for the thousands, tens of thousands of GPUs. If you take those kind of approaches and now come downstream and you're talking about enterprises where maybe they're setting up their first 128 GPU, they've been using cloud, they have some DGXs, and now they're setting up the first clusters and they're going to be expanding. That is a different focus. And this is absolutely where we believe we can add and are adding a lot of value. It's also one of the key reasons NVIDIA partnered with Cisco and also as we mesh our technology, which I'm sure we'll talk more about the specifics. It's an area that is key for us. So a couple different things. I think one, and we've had compute for a long time. We've been getting more aggressive in providing. We are just starting to ship like the B300 in our UCS form factor. So we take that, we combine that with our networking capabilities. We've done partnerships with VAST and more, but VAST actually, I've seen some really great engagement and ramp that we're doing with VAST, where we put their software on UCS. And then you come to putting it all together. And we have a couple different approaches. We have a standard, I would call them, sort of Cisco validated designs that we're doing where we put them all together. And then we use between our Nexus dashboard and InterSight, we do things. But we're also doing, and this is, I would say, new Cisco, we are also disrupting ourselves. So one of the things that we are GAing, general availability, in about 2 weeks is something we call HyperFabric. Nexus HyperFabric AI, which is a very radically different approach, which is a single management system for the cluster, where we tightly integrate VAST, UCS compute, and the cluster. And the idea is you can start small, you can grow those systems, you have visibility across that cluster. You can do things like get a quick view of all the latency from every GPU to every other GPU, and it makes it much simpler for any focused on enterprise to deploy. And so I think this is again the kind of thing that has been missing from this whole AI cluster discussion. It might be.
Yeah, no, this is good because it helps reduce the risk. You've got a playbook that, helps this transition going forward. Now, I'd like to get your views. I've had this debate, Will, for many years. It first started with the cloud folks, right? It was like, I've been debating with the cloud folks, like the importance of the underlay, right? And without a great network that's reliable, scalable, secure, that cloud experience is compromised. Now, you mentioned compute, GPUs, DPUs. It seems that now we're seeing so much attention to that area, right? And network is often gets overlooked, right? Which I have a problem with being a core networking guy, right? I guess, what are your thoughts on your belief on what the real backbone impact is on these AI performance?
Sure. So a few things there. I think, first of all, in the training area, which is obviously a small breadth of the folks that have to worry about that, that obviously has been very clear. A single impact could stop a job and there was discussions early on about losing a week or two of work and millions of dollars if there had been disruption in the network or utilization in training. That's been a key topic. I think one of the things that has been coming out as folks are scoping, what does inference at scale look like? I think some of the outcomes have been that there'd be two ways to think of this. One is you put GPUs in a server, you do server to server traditional front end connection, and you view that GPU as just accelerating that server, but you don't really think about a back end network and you're just running some local models. I think what has been more clear in the last year or two through analysis is that given the efficiency, the best efficiency, even in inference, when you have a range of model sizes, is if you have a pool, a cluster, and you can do both a mix of scale up and scale out. And that is going to get you your overall best, tokenomics as far as the cost and the power. And so I think that's become clear. It may not be that you need to fully be sharing across hundreds or thousands, but you want that connectivity. You want to be able to at some level of tendency, think about subdividing it based on the use case. And even the use cases can vary between inference, fine tuning, And again, a lot of entities may not be worrying about full-on training, but there is still going to be that variation workload. And so I think that we are seeing that networking is key. I think if you listen to NVIDIA, you certainly hear them talking a lot more about the importance of network, and they've put a lot of attention on it. And that was really, when we announced the partnership, that was a key aspect of both the ability to merge some of the technology in the networking area specifically, and then the ability for Cisco to take this to the broader enterprise were the two key factors that NVIDIA set up front they were looking for when we started to partner.
Yeah, no, this is good because there have been a few service providers and even some large enterprises contacted me about my thoughts on SRv6 implementations for these AI backplanes and backbones of the networks and stuff like that. So it's good to see because I've always been that realist, like, hey, if the cloud doesn't matter if you don't have a good underlay. So it's good to see we're aligned there. Now, if we look at, you mentioned training, right, from that side of it, right? And I think this is an important part because we do see, some of these trainings require these centralized type data center kind of involvement. But as you look at these AI data centers, right, the workloads are kind of moving from centralized to kind of like distributed edge, regional environments, which is kind of more geared for this inference and stuff like that. How is Cisco having discussions with customers about this inflection point about moving from training to inference in these AI-ready data centers?
Yep. This is a fun topic. So I always start with the connection of data centers before we get to the sort of spreading training across data centers.
Okay.
The connection of data centers and the benefits of that and the complexities and what's needed. That obviously is a problem that you and I have been involved with for many years from a WAN, a backbone. The hyperscalers have been, very involved with this. So that part is there. And the new aspect is now, I would say, a few things on the front end network with some of the amount of data that you may be moving around. It is putting more load. And not just total aggregate load, but high bandwidth flows that you could be talking about hundreds of gigabits and aggregate of many terabits on a sort of amping up what that WAN or that backbone or the DCI is that is needed on the front end network. And then the new topic, so that puts pressure, a lot more bandwidth. So things like, and we just introduced a P200 chip, which is a chip that is 50 terabit with deep buffers, deep lookup tables, essentially a routing type of chip, but at a scale that is more on par with the core data center switches. And so that is a chip and systems that we believe is very well geared to that WAN, the backbone, the routing, the DCI. The new topic is running training jobs across, and so extending that back end network. And I would say this is early, but there is interest in that. And I would say the thing that's still early, and I've been talking with customers, I've been chatting with Gilad at NVIDIA about this, is how much is it going to be more of a treating it as a common pool and then being able to do mapping of jobs across where you aren't necessarily spanning them, but you want to treat it as a common pool versus you're significantly going to have jobs that are going across. I would say there are early interest absolutely in, I would say, tens of kilometers of being able to treat that as one data center and being able, so that is something that we're starting to look at, what that is, mapping that on top of things, both shallow buffer and deep buffer. NVIDIA announced XGS. We're partnering with them on doing some, right now, actually, we're running simulations of what that would look like for those variations. But I would say it's still pretty, will we get, it's unclear to me, we'll get to the point that we're running workloads across full training jobs across hundreds of kilometers. I think that one might be questionable, but we do have folks ask about it. And to I think everyone's point, the power and the density is such that having these single gigantic do everything data centers is very hard. And so the more flexibility from an infra we can provide flexibility is going to be a big benefit. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's hard work, I agree from that side of it. And one of the things that's interesting is people are going after what I call those go nuggets, right? And I'm seeing kind of like this AI infrastructure space kind of get crowded with specialized players, right? How is kind of Cisco differentiating itself whether you use leveraging Silicon One, the Nexus platform from its competitors.
Yeah. So I always like to start off that one of the big things for us is we are a full technology developer, and so we spend significant on silicon program, and really in this point there's three companies doing that. Broadcom, NVIDIA, and Cisco. So this isn't a large playing field as far as the number that are investing at scale across all of the networking areas. And even in that case, NVIDIA is very focused on a particular role in the data center versus, for instance, routing and all the other roles. So silicon optics, we both in client optics, and we've had acquisitions and investment over the years, but also Acacia for coherent. That's a significant investment for us. Things like co-packaged optics and linear, which we'll hit in a few minutes. Those are big areas. And then, of course, on the software system. So we are bringing those pieces together and across compute storage from a strong partnership standpoint and networking. So if I work from sort of the bottom up in enterprise, the differentiation is we're going to pulling all the pieces together and then providing unified solutions that aren't just you buy my switch, buy that guy's server, and put it all together. I would say that when we go, and now I'm going to jump to the other one end, which is hyperscale, because many folks are not familiar how much progress we've made in that area for the last several years. But things like SONiC, we are, and I'm a big proponent of SONiC. We love our network OSs that we've had for many years, the Nexus OS and iOS XR and iOS XE, but we also have significant investment in SONiC. We work with Microsoft. We're roughly the number 3 contributor to SONiC, and we are actively adding new feature functionality into that, both from a SONiC lower levels and things like modularity, but also we're adding routing protocol features in FRR. So I would say this is not the Cisco that folks think of 20 years ago that's very protective of a lot of those things. So we are leaning in on those areas. At the same time, we're making sure that our enterprise solutions don't require the customers to be worrying about the details of SONiC kinds of things.
Yeah, no, this is good because I've been talking quite a bit with Arpit at the Linux Foundation, regarding SONiC, and it's good to hear about all the progress. And I'm glad you brought it up because I'm hearing from some enterprises, and you let me know if well, it sounds like you have, right? That they're kind of running a mix of NXOS and SONiC, and kind of like Cisco's trying to figure out that seamless interoperability between the two. That's not an easy job, but I am seeing they're being more open to that.
No, we're absolutely open to it. I would say I'm not sure I see as much that are a full mix, but we do think there'll be more of that. So one of the things we're doing, to give you an example, we're adding Nexus Dashboard is like our air management controller. It'll do EVPN, VXLAN fabrics. It does a whole bunch of automation. It's been focused obviously on NXOS all along. We're actually adding SONiC support to that so that you could support a mixed environment with a single controller in the front end. So again, we're embracing SONiC side by side with our network OSs. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, this is good. I mean, I think in this case, it's just good to hear progress about the openness. And you're right, it's definitely not the same Cisco that I'm used to working with in the past, right? From that side of it. And you kind of touch base on the partner. But if we go into some kind of like AI fundamentals, right? When we look at you mentioned kind of this whole massive traffic flow, and what we're seeing is kind of like east to west, right? With low latency and high synchronization. How does Cisco architecture kind of address traditional congestion control approaches with this, because it's a very unpredictability going on, especially as you look at agentic AI. You're seeing these AI workloads for customers being very bursty, unpredictable, and it makes it somewhat of a challenge. Like you said, it's hard work.
Yeah. So to fully answer that, maybe first I'll just hit a little bit more about the NVIDIA partnership, because I think that flows into the options around handling the traffic. So just a couple things on the NVIDIA partnership, because I do think it's key to the architecture. First of all, I'll just mention, a year ago, I would not have believed that we would have the level of partnership. Many folks were like, Cisco's doing their own thing, NVIDIA is focused in their area, they'll compete.
I was one of them.
Yes, but there won't be anything serious or real out of this. And so, we started some chats with NVIDIA probably over a year ago about the possibility of really engaging at a technology level. And then I had the opportunity to work with folks at NVIDIA. And then in February, made this announcement that it was going to be a deep partnership that had real technology. And it's actually a 5 year plus engagement, multi-generational. So this isn't a one generation kind of engagement, because a lot of the customers want to know that as they engage with this, that it's something that'll carry them from 50T, 100T, 200T kinds of things. And so we did agree on a joint strategy. So the key parts. I'll just hit the key parts of the
Sure.
NVIDIA, and I'll go back to the question of the architecture. The key parts we wanted to go in both ways as far as meshing. And so we had one part was our Cisco Silicon One switches running Nexus or SONiC, being able to participate in the adaptive routing with NVIDIA, which is their algorithm that helps NIC to NIC get the very high utilization, and it has reordering, packet spraying, and then reordering. And so that algorithm, which both requires the handshake, but then requires telemetry from the switch silicon, that is part of the agreement. That is something we've implemented. And since that initial announcement, we've made that orderable, available, and we now have customers who are turning that on. So that was one key part, was our silicon, our software, their overall algorithm working together. The second part, which many folks were shocked by, was that Cisco would also ship a Spectrum Ethernet ASIC chip
Right.
silicon switch, and that would be something we would put our software on. And so if you think about that, our Nexus under the hood, that means my team has worked through getting our Nexus software. We also do SONiC, working on the SDK of the Spectrum silicon, which no one else is engaging on that level of engagement, producing a switch that from a customer standpoint will have that NVIDIA Spectrum ASIC with our interfaces, our manageability, our routing protocols, all that software stack. And so that's something we just announced at GTC/DC is now orderable, and we'll be shipping that early in 26. And so that was the second part. And then the last part was all the reference architectures. And this is the reference architectures are so key in this industry. Folks want to have clarity that when they build this, that they will get the performance that we've benchmarked, and that they don't have to spend 6 months, 12 months futzing around with settings. And so those were really the three key parts of this agreement, and we have been executing on that since last February. So now back to your question about the east-west traffic flows.
Right.
I would say we've seen. We've put together a benchmarking team, and we've actually been contributing to ML Commons. And that's on the topic of new Cisco. I would say we've been more transparent than some of our competitors. If you go look at ML Commons, we are publishing that data exactly how we did the testing. Not all of our competitors are doing that. So, put some pressure on them. They should be doing it too. And so we see the following. If you're in the hundreds of GPUs, some of the techniques that are pure fabric based, like that we do in Silicon One, so some of the where we split flows into smaller bursts and then distribute them, which we call flowlet load balancing, or another variation is dynamic load balancing, where we adapt the forwarding decision based on link utilization and queue depths. These, I will call them fabric technologies that are strictly in Silicon One. We have seen that from a performance and from a reliability standpoint, they do just fine. And they get full utilization, very comparable with InfiniBand, comparable with any other solution. When you go above 1,000 GPUs is roughly the point that I've seen. We have seen in our testing and our engagement with customers that now really having that adaptive routing technology that, for instance, that NVIDIA has. And by the way, it's not static. The adaptive routing algorithms are being tweaked every few months. It's not, and so that is key. And so that's one of the key reasons we wanted to have that license on top of our switch, enabling that with our telemetry from Silicon One. And so I think in the end, the customers don't want to know a whole lot about this, but the point is there are breakpoints between hundreds of GPU and thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands. And that would be how I'm seeing it currently.
Yeah, no, this is good because you're offering, even you have that partnership, you're adding your differentiation and value there compared to the competitors, which is good there. No, this is good. Now, We mentioned optics and silicon innovation, and I talked quite a bit to Bill Gardner
Yep.
and Lorenzo in that space. And one of the things that I see, since we've mentioned it a few times, is Cisco's kind of been very vocal about what I call linear pluggable optics,
Yep.
right? And co-package optics, right? How close are these technologies to mainstream deployments in AI data centers?
Sure. So, just quickly, I would state the sort of the bigger picture, and obviously NVIDIA is very strong on the CPO push. I would say that what we're seeing is that the 200 gigabit SerDes, which is this sort of 100T switch generation that we're just coming into, that CPO is useful. It's not necessarily required, and LPO, we are a few months from an 800 gig LPO module that will first customer ship. We view LPO will be very key in this 200 gig generation. The next generation at the 400 gig SerDes is when we think CPO will really be more required. And so I do think, Cisco, we are supporting, we view both important, but I do see LPO maybe more as transitional where CPO is the end state. And
Okay.
so we absolutely have significant projects investment on CPO. And we're also comparing notes with NVIDIA on their CPO efforts and looking at where that might intersect, for instance, with the Cisco Spectrum switch and such. So that's still something we're working through.
Yeah, no, this is good. Now, one of the things there is because you mentioned like when you have thousands of GPUs, right? What I'm concerned about is kind of like the thermal and power efficiency, right? How is Cisco kind of addressing this when you build these optical architecture to address that scaling part of GPUs there?
Sure. So, first of all, and I'm sure you've seen the CPU in state, which
Hmm.
everyone mostly agrees. That one has been pretty significant on the total power savings. What we're seeing is that LPO will get a significant portion of that, at least in this next generation. The downside of and so we believe power-wise it gets a good portion
Okay.
of the CPO savings. The downside of LPO and why, and maybe I'll just say it for me, I don't think it'll last a whole much past the 200 gig, is it really puts the burden on the silicon and the SerDes of the silicon. And I think that, that just, at CPO generation, that burden goes away and you have less constraints on the silicon chip. And then it becomes really a systems problem, getting the reliability of the optics from the package into the silicon and such. So yeah, but we do think LPO for this 200 gig is going to get most of the power benefits of CPO, and so we're planning to support LPO and then CPO also, but it will be behind LPO. So.
Yeah, no, good. This is good. Now, when we look at some of the parts with that, right, is whether Silicon One and the whole roadmap is how do you align? And you mentioned SONiC as well, right? This need for interoperability and open heterogeneous AI environment. How does that roadmap align well?
Sure. And again, open is a big topic on
It's a
multiple
big word,
levels.
yeah.
I'll more say, and you've talked with Bill. I think on the optics side, we've been very involved with all of the standards for many years, and that's active involvement, very strong. I would say in the Ethernet area, we have a plethora of standards right now, and it's
Okay.
still early. I think, and we've seen UA Link. So first of all, UEC, and I'll just say my personal, we're part of it. We will support it. I do believe it's more dominated by one vendor that is not us and not NVIDIA,
Okay.
has used it as a way to more rubber stamp some of what they would like to have a standard say. So I think that's not awesome when it is more single vendor driven. So we're participating. But I do think that in the scale out standpoint, it comes back to it will be more ecosystem based. There'll be a NVIDIA Cisco ecosystem, and there will be a Broadcom ecosystem, and you won't see as much that crosses where folks are working across that boundary anytime soon, is what I would say. UA Link, I think there is, and more so when we get to scale up more so than UA Link, I'd see some of the new announced eSUN that
Mhm.
are very Ethernet based for scale up. We are starting to see some RFPs
Okay.
from select hyperscale that are looking for Ethernet in the scale up. And I think that when you see the customers involved in pushing a standard like the recent ESA, I think those are great, awesome, and I think those are things we're strongly participating in and looking for. And then when you get to so we'll see how those evolve, but that's how I would say sort of a quick run through of those. On the software side, I think that software is a great way to encode standards in
Hmm.
open source software that everyone has access to. And I would go as far to say that, I think SONiC will be somewhat the OS, network OS of AI over the next
Okay.
many years. And again, we have our solutions, proprietary solutions that we're proud of, that we will leverage. But I will give you an example. HyperFabric, which I mentioned
Yeah.
is a fairly radical. Under the hood, it actually is using SONiC.
Oh,
And
okay.
we could have used our own, network OS, but we just thought that there were some benefits to that, and so we don't expose that to the customer because
Okay.
they're managing it completely through the APIs essentially. But that is something under the hood. So we're of a view that those are good ways, and our value is not in curating closed source code. Our value is in moving quickly, the integration of silicon, software, optics, pulling together compute, networking, and storage, and then working with our customers to move fast. This environment is changing every 12 to 15 months. It's not about just getting something fixed and then milking it for 10 years. And so it is a different world.
Yeah, different world. And I didn't know about the SONiC and the
Yes.
HyperFabric now. Because since we're mentioning kind of like software, how's Cisco kind of like embedding AI in its own network management stack, using whether it's predictive analytics for congestion or power or capacity. I mean, are you leveraging that as part of your plan?
So I'll hit two quick parts. One is our use of AI internal,
Okay.
and then the second part is use of AI in the product. So use of AI internal, I would say that there's a couple key things. I think one, which has been interesting to see, is that our IT teams have actually been leveraging AI clusters that we have internal and providing capabilities that we call it circuit internal, but things like our HR systems with a system. So things like when we went through the recent performance reviews, being able to ask questions like, show me, for my staff, show me, what the walk away values are for everyone, so I can think about that. Or for my overall team, give me a feel where the bonuses are this year. So those kinds of things, which we have Workday, as many people do. Those kinds of questions are not ones I could ask in Workday. So
Yeah,
having that
exactly.
layer on top is very, very beneficial. Development is obviously another key area, and frankly, I spend a lot of time on how do we use AI in software development. And there's two parts of that. There's the using the tooling and working with outside, whether it's like OpenAI Codex, Windsurf Cursor, but the other part is how do we merge the AI into our development processes? So things like code reviews, having now, in addition to three human reviewers, having a fourth reviewer, which is essentially an LLM with a sophisticated prompt that will provide code review feedback to the engineers, and then we take that into account. So I think that whole like how to work it into your development flows is much more important than everyone needs to make sure they're using an AI tool. So I would say those are a lot of, as an engineering manager, a lot where I spend time these days. Then we have the other topic, which is AI into the products. And I think
Okay.
some of the things you mentioned, like predictive failure, we've had portions of that, I would say, for a few years, which have been
Hmm.
more heuristics based. The biggest change and where the most customer feedback comes in is folks just want to have a simpler interface. So they want to be able to go and ask questions like troubleshooting scenarios. They want to be able to have a front end. And so this is where we've been evolving this AI canvas, which we're just in a alpha phase going to beta, but ask simple questions, give me summary, give me charts. So a generative interface, and then be able to do simple troubleshooting where in the back end, it could be using data from, hey, our data center controller, our campus controller, and ThousandEyes, and pulling that data together in order to help look at, from a laptop through the access point, through the access switch, all the way to a application that might sit in the data center. How can I get help debugging that in simple terms, and not have to spend a day on it? And that's where we get so much feedback that that's where customers want to go, and so we're putting a lot of effort.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, I think from that point of view, you're using it and you're offering it embedded in your product to bring that innovation. Because I always check with people like, are you drinking your own Kool-Aid, right?
Yes.
From that side of it. Maybe we can close with maybe some forward-looking statement, Will.
Sure.
I mean, when we look at kind of like emerging technologies like quantum networking,
Yeah.
photonic switching, AI-driven fabric orchestration, I could go on and on, right?
Yeah.
How does Cisco kind of see this shaping of the future of AI data centers and kind of like where do you see yourself? When I say yourself, I mean Cisco within the next 2 years, and what breakthroughs do you see happening?
Sure.
It's a loaded question, Will.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to call it a breakthrough, but I think the
Okay.
thing that I'm most excited about, and I think many of us at Cisco are, we've seen, and NVIDIA has done a great job of the entry point of AI into the biggest of the big, the hyperscalers and some of these big neo clouds. What we have not seen is how that is going to roll out from a sovereign standpoint, a service provider standpoint, and an enterprise standpoint. And I think the world is not, in the best place if only a handful of companies have access, ownership, and management of this. I think we're all much better off. So I think the thing that I believe we're working on, and the thing that I, most excited about is having a fundamental impact on how many different institutions, governments, SPs, and enterprises own their own infrastructure, manage their own infrastructure, and are not fully dependent on someone else. Because that matters. It matters where your data is. It matters where you're doing your compute. And I think that there's been a lot of realization of that, but the execution on that has not been easy on how we distribute. So that's my hope of what I want to see.
You're spoken like a true technologist. I love it. This is awesome. Well, Will, hopefully you could join us again in the future. We'll do a progress check. Thanks for joining the Deep Edge podcast.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ray.
All right. Take care.